My ex-wife, Lisa, was a classmate of mine. At the reunion, she spotted me in my work clothes, hurled insults at me, and then doused me with beer. Unable to tolerate her terrible attitude, I left the venue, and right in front of me was a sleek black luxury car, a symbol of my successful life restart after our divorce. My name is Tom Harris. I grew up in an average household and am an utterly ordinary guy with an unremarkable personality, the kind you'd find anywhere. Raised in a normal family, I've lived a standard life. During my student days, I had a fair share of friends and led a pretty standard school life, devoid of any dramatic events. The maxim that I, an ordinary guy, always keep in mind comes from Mr. Johnson, my high school teacher. It's possible to overcome any difficulty. Live with perseverance. This phrase has always been with me, supporting me through everything. Thankfully, I haven't yet encountered a situation that made me desperately rely on these words, but I always make sure to remember them. As a nondescript student, I secretly admired my classmate, Lisa. Her constantly changing expressions, attentive way of listening to people, and occasionally feminine side profile were incredibly attractive to me. When we coincidentally ended up at the same university, I fancifully thought it was fate. Despite being such an inconspicuous student, I've always harbored a secret admiration for my classmate, Lisa. In contrast, I was just another face in the crowd, to the extent that some of my peers didn't even know my name. Yet, sometimes when the conversation turned to our high school days, Lisa would talk to me, and those small interactions made me incredibly happy. Such trivial things brought me joy, and that alone was enough to make me feel content. I was such a modest man. Nevertheless, by the time I graduated from college, I wanted to know where I stood. It was a long unrequited love since high school, and if there was no hope, it was better to give up and move on. Now was the chance. With a resolve of potentially facing rejection, I confessed to Lisa. Yes, okay. Her unexpected reply made me wonder if I was dreaming. My days with Lisa, whom I'd long admired, were truly blissful. I've always tried to gift Lisa with whatever she desired. I worked hard, motivated by the joy of seeing her happy smile when she received my gifts. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and in my third year as a working professional, I proposed. Wanting to fulfill Lisa's wish to be a housewife, I worked harder than ever. Though it was challenging to manage the expenses of two people in my third year, my desire to make Lisa happy drove me to work diligently. Thankfully, my efforts paid off, and I managed an unusual career advancement, surpassing my colleagues and seniors. Employed by a major corporation, my salary was already above average, but with the promotion, I started earning an enviable amount. However, as my income increased, so did Lisa's frivolous spending in the name of self-improvement. While it wasn't threatening our livelihood yet, the seasonal brand bags and new clothes for every meal with friends added up. Each time I thought to speak up, seeing her happy made me hold back, thinking, if I work harder, it'll be fine. Looking back, I regret that my attitude might have contributed to her becoming careless. One day, during lunch break, I was having a coffee and chatting with my colleague, Susan. Suddenly, an internal email popped up on every employee's computer. Susan, who opened the email first, muttered, "No way," in disbelief. What I saw on her screen was shocking news. Due to poor company performance, a massive downsizing was announced. The email coldly listed the names of those to be laid off. As I anxiously scrolled through the list, both Susan's and my names appeared as those being laid off. I nearly dropped my coffee, feeling as if the world had gone dark around me. The employees on the list were all in their early 30s, contributors to the company in their own right. Including Susan and me, several of us approached President Smith to protest. However, President Smith said, We targeted you because you're young and have ample opportunities for reemployment. I'm sorry, but please understand our situation." He apologized deeply with a polite tone, but there was no emotion in his words. It seemed like he was just apologizing to get through the situation. That's all it seemed to me. We realized arguing with President Smith was futile and had no choice but to accept the layoff. "What will you do now?" Susan asked quietly. "I haven't decided anything yet. I need to talk it over with my wife." "What about you, Susan? What are you planning to do?" "While packing up my personal items around my desk," I asked Susan. "I think I might go back to my parents' place," she replied. "Your dad runs his own company, right? So you'll have something to fall back on for now." Speaking in as a cheerful tone as possible, she said, "Yeah, that's right," unaware at the time that Susan's voice was on the verge of tears. On my way home, I pondered what to do next. First, I thought about how to break the news to Lisa. I had worked so hard. Surely, she would understand. Even if I couldn't find another job right away, Lisa would surely support me. I had severance pay, so I could use that while looking for work. Reassured by these thoughts, I quickened my pace home, feeling slightly more optimistic. As soon as I got home and muttered about being laid off, Lisa gasped, "What? No way," turning pale. I understood her reaction. It was only natural to be anxious. "It's tough, but let's work through this together," I began. But before I could finish, Lisa looked straight at me and said, "Let's get divorced." "What?" I was stunned. "If you don't have a job lined up, then we should get divorced. A man without a job, who can't spend money on me, is worthless. I don't need you," Lisa spat out. Everything went dark before my eyes. I couldn't find the words to argue back, as Lisa bombarded me with cruel words. "I married you thinking we'd have financial freedom with your job at a major company. My calculations were wrong." These words echoed in my ears. In the end, Lisa had never loved me from the start. She knew I had admired her since high school and assumed that with my job at a major company, there would eventually be financial stability. She thought she could eventually have the freedom to do as she pleased. I found myself wondering if this is what they mean by love cooling in an instant, even after 100 years. It felt surreal, almost like it was happening to someone else. Watching the woman ranting before me, I even questioned whether she was truly the woman I had married. As Lisa continued to list her grievances, I felt a growing revulsion and said, "All right, let's get divorced." I couldn't settle my emotions or start job hunting until the divorce was finalized. Finally divorced, I began searching for work in earnest. Though I knew it was a tough job market, I hadn't expected it to be this hard to find work, given my smooth career until then. Initially, I looked for jobs where I could use the skills I had developed in my previous role, but nothing came up. Despite having some savings, the urgency to find a new job soon began to set in. As my applications were repeatedly rejected, I realized I couldn't be choosy and started applying for jobs in fields where I had no experience. Although I believed I had average physical strength, I wasn't part of an athletic club, so I still tried to avoid jobs that required heavy labor. However, I ended up interviewing for some labor-intensive roles, and one company's president, Mr. Williams, was very kind. He listened intently to my story of being laid off. "It'll be tough at first, but we'll support you fully. Why don't you work with us?" he offered. By then, I was ready to accept any job offer. The job was mainly office work, but being a construction company, it involved some physical labor. Nobody blamed me for being less strong or slower than others, and I was grateful for everyone's support. I wasn't repaying a favor, but I used my skills to the fullest, making improvements within the company. Thanks to that, I gained trust from Mr. Williams and my colleagues. I felt truly fortunate to have joined this company. Just as I was getting comfortable with my job, I received a notice for a high school reunion. Unpleasant memories resurfaced. I didn't want to see Lisa's face again. But I did want to see Mr. Johnson, my former teacher. After some thought, I decided to attend the reunion. I was getting ready to leave when an unexpected work call came in. Without hesitation, I quickly changed into my work clothes and headed to the job site. It took longer than expected, and by the time I arrived at the reunion, it had already started. I had brought a change of clothes but decided to go in my work attire. Greeting familiar faces, I looked for Mr. Johnson but learned he was hospitalized. If Mr. Johnson isn't here, there's no point in staying. Maybe I should leave early, I thought. Just then, I heard a voice I didn't want to hear, cooing, "Oh, isn't that Tom?" It was Lisa, who had become even more flamboyant, or rather, more vulgar, than before. Beside her stood Ethan, rumored to be a fast-tracked elite. Watching Lisa look up at Ethan with a flirtatious gaze, I instantly knew he was her next mark, and Ethan didn't seem to mind. Lisa, dressed to the nines in luxury brands, and Ethan, in his elite-looking suit, glanced over me from head to toe and burst into laughter, clearly mocking my attire and work clothes. They were mocking me for wearing work clothes. "What's the matter? Is that the only outfit you have for such a grand reunion?" Just as one would expect from a man who got laid off for being incompetent, Lisa said, with a vulgar laugh. "Really, Tom, have some pride, even if you're laid off. Walking around like this. It's just embarrassing to think we went to school with someone at rock bottom," Ethan added with a smirk. Just as I thought Ethan and Lisa were nodding in agreement, Lisa suddenly poured the beer she was holding over my head. "Ah, that outfit suits you just right, you loser," she exclaimed. "Why don't you just leave? You are ruining the vibe here. I don't have time to mingle with poor folks," he said disdainfully, as both of them looked down on me with contempt. It seemed they didn't even notice how everyone around us was taken aback by their behavior. They probably thought I felt out of place in my work clothes. Pitying them, and not wanting to spoil the atmosphere for others, I decided to leave. "I get it, I'll leave," I said and headed for the door. The classmates around me chimed in, "You don't have to leave. You should stay longer since you've come all this way. And don't worry about those two." I didn't want to spend another moment in the presence of those two, standing in the center of the venue with their smug smiles and arms crossed, looking at me. I told my friends I'd catch up with you guys later and opened the door to leave. That's when a sleek, black luxury car pulled up. The appearance of a luxury car outside the restaurant caused quite a stir inside. Naturally, Lisa and Ethan made their way through the crowd, eager to get the best view of the car. Calculating as ever, Lisa was eager to find out who the car belonged to. Then, the chauffeur stepped out and said, "President Harris, your car is ready," saying politely. I could feel the atmosphere behind me freeze. "President Harris," Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. I glanced briefly at the two of them, then entered the car where Susan was waiting. I whispered in Lisa's ear, making sure no one else could hear, "Looks like Ethan's company is in trouble. You might want to start looking for your next guy soon." Then I slipped past the motionless Lisa and got into the car. "Hi, how was your day?" Susan greeted me with a smile as I climbed into the car. "It was okay." I let out a sigh, relaxing my shoulders as I answered. In fact, my new job turned out to be at Susan's family's company, by sheer coincidence. Which meant that the kind Mr. Williams, who had been so supportive, was actually Susan's father. He had appreciated my earnestness and diligence and had made me vice president. Susan and I had confessed our feelings for each other. We found comfort and ease in our shared history, and before I knew it, we were a couple. Mr. Williams, more than anyone else, was happy for us. Susan and I were even planning our wedding soon. I had learned about Ethan's company during my business dealings. Although it was a major company, there were persistent rumors of financial irregularities, and it seemed an investigation was imminent. Whether or not the rumors were true, a company with such a reputation wasn't a good business partner. It was clear that Ethan was heading into rough waters. As I looked out the window, I thought about who Lisa would latch onto next, remembering her scornful laughter. "They'll be fine," Susan assured me. "People like that always find a way to survive." I had to agree with her. Soon, we arrived at the hospital where Mr. Johnson was staying. He greeted me warmly, a bit frailer but with the same kind smile. "Wow, Tom, you've got a real man's look now." He grinned at me with a cheerful smile. "Mr. Johnson, I've always held on to the words you told me back then. I've followed your teachings, and now, I'm truly happy in both my personal and professional life. Thank you so much." As I reported this, Mr. Johnson smiled warmly, looking at Susan and me, and I deeply felt how fortunate I was to have such a wonderful mentor. Half a year after that tumultuous reunion, Susan and I happily tied the knot. At the company, I'm being rigorously yet kindly groomed by my father-in-law, the current president, as a successor. There's still much for me to learn, but I believe I'm living the most fulfilling days of my life right now. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't dared to switch industries back then, or if Lisa had stayed with me after I was laid off. But it's precisely because of that layoff and divorce that I have my current happiness. Those times were tough and embarrassing, but I'm here today because I persevered. There's no obstacle that can't be overcome, just as Mr. Johnson said. I never gave up, found what I could do, and worked hard at it. There will surely be more challenges ahead, but I'll continue to strive step by step, never arrogant or despairing, holding Mr. Johnson's words close to my heart. For Susan, who supported me, and for myself,